Unexpected revelation. Princess Charlotte explains her bruises to palace guards, emotional story. Morning light filtered through tall windows, touching the polished floors and pale stone walls. Palace guards stood at their assigned positions, alert but relaxed, used to the rhythm of royal life. They had learned to notice everything without reacting to most of it. Small movements, changes in tone, the way footsteps sounded in long corridors, these details mattered. Princess Charlotte walked alongside her family as they moved from one area of the palace to another. She was polite, composed, and carried herself with the calm confidence people often noticed about her. She greeted staff members kindly, her voice soft, her manners careful. To most people watching, she looked perfectly fine, just a young royal going about her day. But one guard noticed something small that made his chest tighten. As Charlotte adjusted her sleeve while walking, a faint mark appeared on her arm. It was light, almost hidden but visible enough to catch a trained eye. The guard did not stare. He did not react. Years of experience had taught him to remain still, but his attention sharpened immediately. A few steps later, another guard noticed the same thing. They exchanged no words. They didn't need to. A brief glance was enough. Something was not right, or at least, something needed to be understood. The guards continued escorting the group as usual. No sudden movements, no change in posture. Everything looked normal to anyone watching. Yet inside their minds, questions had begun forming. They knew how easily rumors could start. They also knew how dangerous it was to ignore signs, no matter how small. Princess Charlotte seemed unaware of the concern around her. She chatted softly, her expression calm. Still, there was a quietness about her that day, nothing obvious, just a feeling. Guards often learned to trust those instincts. They had protected many people, young and old, and they understood that children did not always speak when something troubled them. As the group passed through a quieter hallway, Charlotte slowed slightly, allowing a guard to open a door ahead. When she lifted her arm again, the mark showed more clearly. It was not severe, but it was noticeable. The guard felt a weight settle in his stomach. He reminded himself to stay professional. Palace protocol was clear: observe first, confirm later. Never assume, never accuse, never alarm, especially when it came to a child. The guards allowed the family to continue on their way. Once Charlotte was safely with her caregivers, the guards remained at their posts. Only after the area cleared did they quietly speak to one another. "Did you see it?" one guard asked in a low voice. "Yes," the other replied. "I did." Neither said more. They didn't need details. Both knew the next step was caution and care. The rest of the morning passed slowly. The guards carried out their duties as usual, but their focus stayed sharp. They observed Charlotte from a distance whenever she passed through a corridor or room. She smiled when spoken to. She thanked staff members. She laughed softly at something said by her brother. Nothing in her behavior suggested fear or distress. And yet, the marks remained. One guard remembered his own training, how instructors stress that children sometimes hide discomfort not because they are afraid, but because they don't want to cause worry. That thought stayed with him. Later in the day, during a quieter moment away from visitors and cameras, a senior palace guard was informed discreetly. He listened carefully, his expression calm but serious. He did not rush. He did not jump to conclusions. Instead, he asked questions. Was she upset? A child surrounded by authority figures needed to feel safe, not questioned or judged. Any approach had to be gentle, respectful, and appropriate. The decision was made to wait for the right moment. That moment came later in the afternoon. Charlotte was in a quiet area, engaged in a simple activity, supervised and comfortable. The senior guard approached calmly, making sure his presence was not sudden. He kept his voice warm, his posture relaxed. "Good afternoon, Princess," he said softly. Charlotte looked up and smiled. "Good afternoon." He did not look at her arm. He did not mention anything immediately. Instead, he spoke about ordinary things, the day, the weather, how busy the palace had been. She responded politely, her tone steady. Only after a pause did he gently ask, "Are you feeling all right today?" Charlotte hesitated for a moment. It was brief but noticeable. "Yes," she said carefully. The guard nodded, not pressing. "That's good to hear." There was another pause. The space between them felt important. The guard knew that sometimes silence invited honesty more than questions did. Charlotte glanced down at her sleeve. She adjusted it slightly, then looked back up. Her face showed thoughtfulness, not fear. "I'm okay," she said again, more firmly this time. The guard smiled gently. "I'm glad." He did not push further. He knew that trust could not be rushed. The goal was not answers, it was safety and understanding. After the interaction, the guard stepped back. He reported only what he had observed: calm behavior, no distress, no fear. The information was passed on carefully, respectfully, without assumptions. As evening approached, the palace settled into its familiar quiet. Lights softened. Footsteps echoed less often. Guards changed shifts, but the concern remained shared. One guard stood near a window, watching the sky darken. He thought about how easy it was to overlook small things, how often people assumed children were fine just because they smiled. That day reminded him why his job mattered, not just to protect the palace, but the people inside it. Princess Charlotte passed through the hallway once more, accompanied and safe. She smiled at a guard as she walked by. He nodded respectfully. Nothing more was said. But something had changed. Awareness had replaced routine. Attention had deepened. And a quiet promise settled among those responsible for her safety, that they would continue to watch, to listen, and to care, even when answers were not yet clear. The day ended calmly, but the story had only begun. The next morning began quietly, just like the day before. Soft sunlight entered the palace halls, and the sound of distant footsteps echoed through the long corridors. Everything appeared normal, calm, and well organized. Yet for the palace guards, the memory of the previous day had not faded. Their attention remained sharp, not out of fear but out of care. Princess Charlotte arrived for her morning routine, walking with calm confidence. She greeted staff members kindly, her manners careful and respectful. She looked well rested. Her smile was gentle and her voice steady. To anyone else, she seemed like a child enjoying her day in a safe place. But the guards continued to observe quietly. They noticed how she moved, how she spoke, how she listened. Nothing seemed wrong. Still, one detail remained in their minds: the marks they had seen earlier. They were not looking for problems. They were simply making sure nothing had been missed. Later that morning, Charlotte was guided to a quiet room where she often spent time reading or drawing. It was a peaceful space with large windows and comfortable chairs. A trusted staff member stayed nearby, giving her enough space while ensuring she was never alone. A senior palace guard stood outside the room, positioned so he could see inside without interrupting. He believed strongly that children should never feel watched or judged. Safety, in his mind, came from calm presence, not pressure. Charlotte sat at a small table, carefully choosing colors for her drawing. Her movements were slow and thoughtful. She hummed softly, unaware of the concern she had caused. She was simply being herself. After some time, the senior guard stepped inside. He made sure his steps were heard so his presence was not sudden. Charlotte looked up and smiled. "Hello again," she said politely. "Hello, Princess," he replied warmly. "I hope your morning is going well." "It is," she said. "I like this room, it's quiet." "Yes," the guard agreed. "Quiet places can be nice." He did not sit too close. He stayed at a respectful distance, giving her space. He asked about her drawing, listening carefully as she explained what she was making. Her words were clear, her tone relaxed. The guard noticed how carefully she spoke, choosing her words with care. It reminded him that she was growing up in a world where every word mattered. That alone could be heavy for a child. After a moment, he spoke gently. Yesterday, I asked if you were feeling all right. Charlotte nodded. I just wanted to make sure, he continued. If there's ever anything you want to talk about, it's always okay. Charlotte stopped drawing for a moment. She looked at the paper, then at her hands. The room remained quiet. I know, she said softly. There was no rush. The guard waited, keeping his expression calm. After a few seconds, Charlotte spoke again. Sometimes people worry too much. The guard smiled slightly. Sometimes they do, but they worry because they care. Charlotte thought about that. She nodded slowly. I didn't want anyone to worry, she said. The guard listened closely. He did not interrupt. He did not ask leading questions. He allowed her to speak at her own pace. I was just playing, Charlotte continued. I was trying something new. I slipped. She shrugged lightly as if it were a small thing. It didn't hurt much, she added, and I was fine afterward. The guard felt a quiet sense of relief, but he remained careful. He knew that children sometimes minimize things without realizing it. I understand, he said. Thank you for telling me. Charlotte looked up at him. Am I in trouble? The question was honest and it struck him deeply. No, he answered immediately, his voice gentle but firm. You're not in trouble at all. She relaxed slightly. We just want to make sure you're safe, he continued. That's our job, Charlotte nodded again. I didn't want to make a big deal. That's very thoughtful of you, the guard said. But it's also okay to tell someone when something happens. She smiled faintly. I'll remember. The guard did not press further. He thanked her for speaking and reminded her that she could always talk to trusted adults whenever she wanted. He stood and gave a small, respectful bow before leaving the room. Outside, he paused for a moment. The conversation replayed in his mind. Her honesty, her calm, her desire not to worry others, it all showed how much responsibility she already carried. He reported the conversation carefully, choosing his words with respect and accuracy. He made it clear that there was no sign of fear or distress, only a minor accident and a thoughtful child who did not want to cause concern. The information was received calmly. No alarm was raised. No unnecessary attention was drawn. Instead, the palace quietly adjusted routines, ensuring extra care without making Charlotte feel watched. Throughout the rest of the day, Charlotte moved freely, laughing softly at times, focused on her activities. Guards remained nearby, alert but unobtrusive. One guard watched as she walked down a hallway, speaking happily with a staff member. He realized that protection was not only about preventing danger. It was about creating an environment where a child felt safe enough to speak and strong enough to trust. As evening approached, Charlotte passed by again. This time she waved. The guard smiled and nodded back. The concern that once felt heavy had softened into understanding. Yet the experience stayed with them all, a quiet reminder that even in the safest places, listening mattered just as much as watching. The palace lights dimmed as night settled in. The guards stood ready, not only to protect walls and halls, but the small moments that mattered most. The following day moved at a slower pace. There were fewer visitors in the palace and the halls felt calmer. The quiet made small sounds clearer, the gentle closing of doors, the soft steps of staff, the distant ticking of clocks. For the guards, this kind of day required even more attention. Silence had a way of making thoughts louder. Princess Charlotte began her morning as usual. She appeared relaxed, comfortable in familiar surroundings. She greeted people with the same polite smile, thanked staff members, and listened carefully when spoken to. Nothing about her behavior suggested worry. Still, the guards remembered the recent conversation and stayed quietly aware. Charlotte spent part of the morning in a learning session, seated at a table with books and papers. She listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and focused on her tasks. Anyone watching would have seen a child doing her best, eager to learn and proud to do things on her own. During a short break, she walked with a staff member toward a small sitting area. As she reached for a book, her sleeve slipped slightly. One of the guards nearby noticed the faint mark again. It was already fading, lighter than before. That small detail brought reassurance, but also reflection. Later that day, the senior palace guard met briefly with a few trusted members of staff. The discussion was quiet and respectful. They spoke about responsibility, about balance, and about how children often try to be strong before they understand what that means. No one spoke loudly. No one blamed anyone. The focus was on care. That afternoon, Charlotte was allowed some free time in a familiar indoor space where she could move freely but safely. She enjoyed these moments the most. They made her feel normal, like any other child. She laughed softly as she tried a new activity, carefully following instructions she had learned earlier. A guard watched from a respectful distance, not interfering, just present. He noticed how determined she looked, how she tried again when something didn't work the first time. That determination explained a lot. After a short while, Charlotte paused and sat down. She looked thoughtful. The same senior guard approached slowly and calmly, making sure not to surprise her. "You're doing very well," he said kindly. "Thank you," she replied. "I'm trying to get better." "That's good," he said. "Trying is how we learn," Charlotte nodded. She looked at her hands for a moment, then up at him. There was no fear in her eyes, only honesty. "I didn't tell everything before," she said quietly. The guard stayed calm. "You can take your time." She took a small breath. "I didn't just slip once. I tried again even after I fell." He listened carefully. "I wanted to prove I could do it," she continued. "I didn't want help right away." The guard understood. Many adults felt the same way, even if they didn't say it. "I see," he said gently. "I knew it might leave marks," Charlotte added, "but I thought it would be okay." The guard nodded slowly. "It's good to be brave," he said, "but it's also good to know when to ask for help." Charlotte thought about that. "I didn't want to disappoint anyone." The words were simple, but they carried weight. "You didn't disappoint anyone," the guard said softly. "Trying your best never does." She smiled, relieved. The conversation ended naturally. There was no lecture, no serious tone, just understanding. The guard made sure Charlotte felt heard, not corrected. When he stepped away, he felt a deep sense of respect for her honesty. She had chosen to share more, not because she was forced, but because she trusted him. That trust mattered. Later, the guard reported the new information carefully. He explained that Charlotte had been pushing herself, trying to grow, trying to be capable. The marks were not signs of danger, but of effort. Still, effort needed guidance. The response from the palace was thoughtful. No sudden changes, no public attention, just quiet adjustments, gentle reminders, more encouragement to ask for help, and reassurance that learning included mistakes. That evening, Charlotte joined her family for a calm dinner. She laughed at something said, her shoulders relaxed. The atmosphere felt warm and normal. Guards stood nearby, as always, but now with a deeper understanding. One guard reflected on how easily strength could be misunderstood. A child trying to be strong could appear silent. A quiet child could be carrying thoughts far beyond her years. As the night settled in, Charlotte prepared for rest. She moved through the hallway, her steps light. She paused when she saw a familiar guard and gave a small wave. "Good night," she said. "Good night, Princess," he replied. The marks on her arm were nearly gone now, fading like the worry that once surrounded them. What remained was something more important, a lesson shared quietly, without drama. The palace returned to its peaceful rhythm. The guards continued their watch, not just with sharp eyes but with open minds. They knew now that protection was not only about stopping harm. It was about understanding effort, listening to quiet voices, and guiding strength in the right direction. And for Princess Charlotte, the day ended with a sense of comfort. She had been heard, she had been understood, and she knew, without being told, that she was not alone. The days that followed moved gently, like calm water after a small ripple. Life inside the palace returned to its steady rhythm, but something had quietly changed. The guards, the staff, and even the routines carried a new softness. a deeper awareness that did not show on the surface but lived in the small details. Princess Charlotte continued her daily activities as usual. She attended learning sessions, spent time reading, and enjoyed moments of light play. She laughed easily and spoke with confidence. Anyone watching would see a happy child, comfortable in her surroundings. Yet those responsible for her care now paid closer attention, not with worry but with understanding. One morning, Charlotte walked through a wide hallway holding a book close to her chest. A guard opened a door for her, and she thanked him with a smile. He noticed how relaxed she seemed. Her movements were natural, not careful or tense. That alone brought reassurance. Later that day, during a quiet break, Charlotte chose to sit near a window. Sunlight warmed the space, and she watched the garden outside. A staff member nearby offered her a drink and asked if she needed anything. Charlotte shook her head politely. "I'm all right," she said. The staff member smiled and stayed close without hovering. This balance had become important, being present without pressure. It allowed Charlotte to feel safe while still free to be herself. In a nearby room, a small meeting took place among senior staff and guards. Their voices were low, their tone calm. They spoke about how children learn through effort, how mistakes are part of growth, and how important it is to guide without controlling. Everyone agreed that the situation had been handled with care, but it had also taught them something valuable. One guard spoke quietly. "She's strong for her age, but strength needs space to grow safely." Another nodded. "And trust. She trusted us enough to speak." That trust became a shared responsibility. Over the next few days, small changes appeared, not rules or restrictions, but gentle reminders. When Charlotte tried something new, someone was nearby to offer help if she wanted it. When she focused too hard, she was reminded that breaks were okay. No one made her feel watched. No one treated her differently in public. Charlotte noticed the difference, even if she didn't fully understand it. She felt more comfortable asking small questions. She felt less pressure to do everything alone. One afternoon, she struggled slightly with a task she was learning. In the past, she might have tried again silently. This time, she paused and looked up. "Can you help me, please?" she asked. The staff member smiled warmly. "Of course." That simple moment mattered more than anyone said aloud. A guard observing nearby felt a quiet sense of pride. Not because the problem was solved, but because she had felt safe enough to ask. That evening, Charlotte joined her family for a relaxed time together. The room was filled with soft conversation and gentle laughter. She listened, spoke when she wanted to, and leaned back comfortably in her chair. There was no tension in her posture. A guard standing near the doorway watched quietly. He remembered the first moment he had noticed the marks, the unease that followed, and the care taken to understand rather than assume. Now, watching her laugh, he felt certain they had chosen the right path. Later that night, as Charlotte prepared to rest, she walked through a quiet hallway. The lights were low and the palace felt peaceful. She noticed a familiar guard standing nearby and stopped. "I tried again today," she said. The guard smiled. "How did it go?" "I asked for help," she replied. "It was easier." "That's good," he said. "Sometimes the strongest thing is asking." She nodded thoughtfully. "I think so too." She wished him good night and continued on her way. The guard stood still for a moment after she left. That brief exchange stayed with him. It reminded him that growth did not always come from pushing harder, but from learning when to pause. As days passed, the marks that had once caused concern were completely gone. But the lesson remained, not as a rule written down, but as a feeling shared among those who cared for her. The palace returned fully to its normal pace. Visitors came and went. Duties were carried out. Smiles were exchanged. Yet behind the formality there was a quiet promise held by the guards and staff, to always listen first, to always choose care over fear. Princess Charlotte continued to grow, not just in knowledge but in confidence. She knew she was supported. She knew her voice mattered. And she knew she did not have to carry everything alone. One guard, during a late shift, looked out over the silent halls and reflected on how small moments could carry great meaning. A faint mark, a gentle question, a child choosing to speak. These were not dramatic events, but they shaped trust. The palace lights dimmed as night deepened. The guard stood watch, steady and calm. Inside, all was peaceful. And though nothing outward had changed, everything that truly mattered had grown stronger. Care, trust, and the quiet understanding that protection is not only about being strong, but about being kind. The final days of the week passed peacefully, and the palace felt steady and calm. Morning routines followed familiar patterns. Guards stood at their posts, staff moved quietly through halls, and sunlight continued to fill the wide windows. Nothing seemed unusual, yet something important had settled into place, an understanding shared by everyone who cared for Princess Charlotte. She began each day with confidence. Her steps were light, her voice clear. She greeted people with ease and listened when others spoke. She still worked hard, still tried new things, but there was a change in how she carried herself. She no longer felt the need to prove everything on her own. That small shift made a big difference. One morning, Charlotte joined a learning session that involved careful focus and patience. She listened closely, asked questions, and practiced calmly. When something felt difficult, she paused instead of rushing. She took a breath and tried again. When she needed help, she asked without hesitation. The adults nearby noticed. They did not comment on it openly. They didn't need to. The change spoke for itself. A guard standing near the doorway watched quietly. He remembered how worried he had felt at the beginning, how heavy the responsibility had seemed. Now, watching her grow more comfortable in her own space, he felt relief. The concern had not been ignored, it had been understood. Later that day, Charlotte walked through a corridor where portraits lined the walls. She slowed her steps, studying the pictures with curiosity. A guard walked a few steps behind, not too close, not too far. This distance had become natural, present but respectful. Charlotte stopped and turned slightly. "Do you ever get tired standing so long?" she asked. The guard smiled. "Sometimes, but it's part of the job." "Is it hard?" she asked. "It can be," he answered honestly. "But it's worth it." She thought about that. "I think learning is like that," she said. The guard nodded. "That's a good way to see it." She smiled and continued walking. That simple exchange showed how much she had grown, not just in confidence but in understanding. She was learning to see effort as something shared, not carried alone. As the day went on, Charlotte spent time doing things she enjoyed, reading, talking, and spending quiet moments thinking. She seemed relaxed. The pressure she once placed on herself had softened. She still cared deeply, but now she allowed space for rest. In the evening, she joined her family for a calm gathering. The room felt warm and comfortable. She laughed freely, her shoulders relaxed. The people around her noticed how present she was in the moment. A guard stood nearby, as always. He thought about how protection worked best when it was unseen, when safety allowed a child to simply be a child. As night approached, Charlotte prepared for rest. The palace grew quiet. Soft lights replaced bright ones. Footsteps became less frequent. Charlotte walked through a hallway she had passed many times before. She paused near a window and looked outside. The sky was dark, calm, and full of stars. A guard nearby noticed her pause. "It's a clear night," he said gently. "It is," she replied. "It makes everything feel quiet." "Yes," he agreed. "Quiet can be comforting," she nodded. "I like knowing people are nearby, even when it's quiet." The guard felt the meaning behind her words. "We are always nearby," he said. She smiled, satisfied, and continued on her way. That night, as the palace settled into stillness, the guards reflected on the days that had passed. What began as a moment of concern had become a lesson in care. They had learned that listening mattered more than reacting. That calm questions were stronger than fear. That trust, once given, had to be protected. The marks that once raised questions were gone completely now, but no one forgot what they had represented. They were not signs of harm, but signs of effort, of growth, of a child learning how to be strong. In the days that followed, life continued as usual. Visitors arrived. Events were planned. Duties were carried out. Princess Charlotte moved through it all with a quiet confidence that felt natural and earned. She was still learning. She was still growing. But she was no longer carrying the weight alone. One guard, finishing a late shift, paused in a quiet hall and looked around. The palace stood calm and steady, just as it always had. Yet he knew that something meaningful had happened here, something that would not appear in records or reports. It lived in the way a child spoke up, in the way adults listened, in the way care was chosen over assumption. As dawn approached, the guard handed over his post and walked away, feeling at peace. Princess Charlotte slept safely, surrounded by quiet care and understanding. And as a new day waited to begin, the lesson remained clear and lasting. True protection is not only about watching closely. It is about listening gently and ensuring that every small voice feels safe enough to be heard.